All right, so I want to talk about graphs and police brutality. So, examining graphs a little bit more, we're going to look at frequency tables and histograms this time, and a few other kinds of things. So, what are the different kinds of graphs? So, there are a few different kinds of graphs that we can use to represent data. I've mentioned some of these before. Line graphs, which are just the line straight through the graph, pie charts, which show parts of a whole, bar charts, which just have bars up and down. These compare things between different groups. Scatter plots show the relationships between data sets. We talked about that last week. And histograms, which are a way to summarize data visually. Bar charts and histograms look really, really similar because they both kind of have the same bar style. It's just the difference is that bar charts compare different groups, whereas histograms summarize data. Okay, and line graphs, they show changes over time. So again, top left, that's a line graph. Bar graph is right here. Pie chart is right here. Scatter plot is right here. Neither of these I mentioned, so don't even worry about it. So to make a graph, all right, key thing is first look at the data and figure out what you're trying to show people. Okay, so are you trying to show change like the change of something over time? Are you trying to compare like 2 or 3 different pieces of data? Like for example, SAT scores among people of different races. You know, are you trying to show the different ways kids get to school each day? Knowing what kind of data you're looking at and what you're trying to show people is going to tell you what kind of graph you want to make. The second piece is once you've decided what kind of graph you want to make, you want to write a descriptive title. So put in the elements of looking at the different transportation methods for students at, East Valley High School or something like that. Looking at the effects of climate change on global temperature over the last 20 years. Write a descriptive title, and then you want to label the graphs. You want to label the X and Y axes. Or, if you're doing like a pie chart, you're going to label it like with a legend and color coding, blah, 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 blah. The next thing you want to do is use your data to create the graph, okay? Show the information visually. And then the last bit is create a legend or finish labeling. So if there's any other little things that you have to wait to label until after all of the lines, dots, bars, whatever were in there, then you go ahead and you finish it off. Okay. So the key thing about titling graphs is you want to make sure that the titles are descriptive. You want to mention pieces of information you're comparing or like specify the topic you're talking about, like percentage of police involved deaths broken down by cause, like in a pie chart. Maybe if you're doing a line graph, you could say like the number of people killed by police over the last 6 months. If you're doing a bar chart, you could maybe compare like the number of people killed by police in 10 major cities, and each city is like one of the bars. So you want the titles to be detailed, but you also don't want them to be too long. Like you don't want them to be like 3 sentences long. They need to describe what is going on. Okay, it's a person's first place for information. Like this is their first glimpse at what they're going to be looking at. So it needs to be descriptive so they understand what they're looking at, but not too long so that they get like lost in the weeds. The labels and the legends of graphs are important so people know what they're looking at. Like you need to make sure your labeling makes sense, that your axes are labeled. If it's not a pie chart, you're going to have an like an X and Y axis, so you're going to need to label those. If you have pie charts or graphs of multiple data sets, like bar graphs or stacked bar graphs, you're going to need a legend where you color or pattern code. So pattern code is like, if you're going to do dots, filling inside like a bar or like lines or something like that, if you're not using color. Basically, you just need to be able to like say, okay, all of the bars in yellow are going to represent like New York. All of the ones in green are going to represent Los Angeles. All of the ones in like purple are going to represent Arizona or something. And then like you have those 3 things on your chart, so people know what fits with what. Please make sure to include any units of measurement. So, if you're talking about like time in years, you need to make sure to say like 1, 2, 3, like all of the numbers like correspond to years. So you have to make sure that you put the unit of measurement with the axis. Okay. Make sure the values are evenly spaced. You know, your intervals are evenly spaced, so your data doesn't end up skewed or you don't end up misrepresenting something. Um, so we're going to talk more in detail about frequency tables and histograms. Right now, you just need to know that frequency tables are helpful for storing number data, like how often something happens, and then we can present that information in a histogram, which looks like a bar graph, but it's all about showing summarized information instead of comparing one item to another. So like this is a frequency table, and right here on the right, and then this is a histogram. So the frequency table basically says, like, let's say, you know, you have a bunch of people picking random numbers or something like that. And these are the numbers that they can pick from. This is, by the way, British, so the commas actually represent points. So it's like 11.945 instead of 11,000. It's not 11,000, it's 11 point. But yeah. So anyway, let's say people are picking like random numbers or they're, you know, doing like a percentage or something. Um, and you like how many times like a particular number shows up in a in like this data set. So what it does is it counts the number. So 11.945 showed up 3 times in the data set. So that's why they have the frequency of 3. 11.96 showed up 9 times in the data set. 11.99 showed up 21 times in the data set. So basically what they did was they wrote down the number and then they wrote the number of times that that value showed up in the data set. And that shows us the frequency. And then what they did was they just graphed it. So on the left hand side is the frequency, how often a value showed up, and on the bottom are the actual numbers, like 11.945 or 11.99. And then what they did was they just created a bar that went up to where the frequency ended. Okay, and then the line here that they drew was just to kind of join them all together, like make an arc. But you don't need to do that. So that's a basic frequency table in histogram. Okay, so this is just a quick overview on the different kinds of graphs that you might see, just to give you some familiarity with them. We're going to talk more specifically about the different kinds of graphs that show up when we're talking about police brutality in the next piece. So you're going to watch a documentary about the prison system and police brutality and kind of the race and class like connections that you know, things like the 13th Amendment have to the very fabric of America. And so it's a really interesting documentary. It does take quite a bit to get through, so just heads up on that. But I hope you enjoy it. Thanks, guys.